Everybody all right? That's fantastic. Okay, so I've started the stream, Andrew, so hopefully it'll work. There we go. I will do that now. Remind me to, instead of showing my whole window, I'll just share the screen, so remind me. Ah, no, I have to share the whole screen for PowerPoint, I've just remembered, because it doesn't work otherwise. That's okay. There you go. So that is now, oops. Hello. Good. Oh yeah, I've got some amazing examples. Like really high-tech websites, like enough to rival the likes of, like, you know, BBC News and stuff like that. So, as usual, we'll just YouTube's working. Okay. So as usual, we'll just give everybody a couple minutes to get settled in and join and stuff, and then we'll start off. So what we're going to do today, we'll just do a bit of a recap on last week, just to see what everybody remembers and things like that. And then what we'll do is we're going to start then looking at CSS, and how we can use CSS to style our web pages so that they look as so they look fancy, so that they don't look like a Word document, basically. So yeah, it is a benefit. It is a benefit if they look a bit different to a Word document. So Andrew just asked, has everybody got their website code open? So while we're waiting for everybody to join, if you'd like to open up either the code pen, note, you were using Notepad, weren't you? Yeah, that's good. So if we get everything loaded up, and then if anybody does, as Andrew's just put there, if anybody does need a template, let me know and I will share one. I can see Trace has put me at this point in the week. I think that's pretty much an accurate description of all of us. By Wednesday. Has everyone had a good week at school so far? Yeah? That's good. Yeah. Yeah. So as I said, what we'll be doing is we'll be doing adding to what we made last week. So as a result, we will need to have our HTML stuff open and at the ready, and then some of you will also need to have a new document as well for because we'll be starting off CSS. So if you are editing locally, you'll need to open up a new document to have as your CSS file. So if you are editing in things like Notepad, you will open up a new blank Notepad ready to start the CSS file, and then you can save that then as whatever you want to call it, but make sure that you add .css to the end of the name so that you remember that that's your CSS file. Okay, so we'll give everybody a chance to do that. Start off then in a couple of minutes. Let's see. That's okay. Color change, a hover. Okay, nice. So you've done quite a few of the quite a bit of CSS styling then. That's quite good. It's quite good. That sounds quite good. Yeah. As Andrew said, we're going to be working from the ground up today, so it's going to be right from how to structure your CSS page through to how we can get rid of those inline styles so that we can start doing things in CSS. So it'll be a nice sort of gentle introduction to CSS for those who are new, but also a chance for those who already have used CSS before to try and build up their knowledge on it, and as Andrew said, challenge themselves to go slightly further. So got enough. So there's enough. Be plenty of things for everybody to do today. So we'll start in about a minute or so. We'll start up at 4:10. So that's given everybody time then to get joined in. So as I was saying, what today is going to be all about is mainly looking at CSS and how we can apply things to our HTML document that's going to link our So for those of you who are editing in CodePen, you won't need to do this step, but there will be some cases where when you're editing locally, you do need to tie your HTML document to your CSS document. So we'll look at how we can do that as well. And then the next couple of weeks then will mainly be a focus on designing our websites to look a bit more professional by styling them using CSS. So we'll start off now with a bit of a recap on what we did last week. So first thing is I have a question, and can anybody tell me in the chat what a footer is, and can you give an example of something that you might find in a footer on a website? Yeah. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, spot on. Well done. And I see that Trace has also put the bottom of the page where you put all the really boring info. Yeah, so there's a lot of often there's things like links to other pages. There's a lot of copyright stuff, but sometimes there can be some really interesting things in there. Like Andrew's just put, social media links. There's a site map. So there's a lot of different stuff that goes in the footer. So I've taken the footer from the TechnoCamp's website. So it probably goes a bit bigger than that, but I've just taken the right bottom part of the page where there's a bit of information about Swansea University, which is kind of where TechnoCamp's sort of like HQ is, so to speak. And then there's a little bit of, there's some links there to a cookie manager and to a privacy policy. So that's right at the bottom of the TechnoCamp's website, along with a whole bunch of other things as well. But I've just taken that small section for you to see what I mean. So the next question, does anybody know what the I tag does? What does the I tag do? So it would go into, obviously, our HTML document, and it will do something with the text. So what does anybody know what the I tag does? Yeah, that's right, spot on. So yeah, it will make your font change to be, it'll change your font style to being in italic. So everything that goes between the I tags will be then converted to being in italics. So well done. And then the last question, to kind of recap on what we discussed last week, was, does anybody remember what the BR tag does? Yeah, we didn't really talk about it much, this particular tag, so it's not something that we covered in a lot of detail, so don't worry if you're not sure about this one. I only mentioned it briefly, and just see if anybody have any ideas? It's not something that you would use very often anyway, really, but it can be useful. So the BR tag is used to break up a paragraph into separate lines. So you would have, for an example, it would say at the end of where it says, well, we've got the word up, if you put, by putting BR at the end of that sentence, it would then break your sentence up into separate lines. So at the end of each one of the points, so after up and paragraph, there would be a BR tag, and that would break up your paragraph into separate lines, to save it being in one huge line that runs along the full length of the screen. So there you go, Andrew's put an example of that in the chat for you, to demonstrate what that means. So it will break up your paragraph to being in separate lines, so that it's not one long sentence. Now, what I've got now is a really amazing example of, and this is the website I was telling you about, this is something that I made, okay, and I'm very proud of it, that would rival any major website, okay, so be prepared for this. But essentially, this is my website. That it was one of the first things that I did as one of the first websites that I made as part of my degree, and here it is. So as you can see, it looks really amazing. You can criticize it, by the way. It is really terrible, but essentially, this is a website that has no styling on it whatsoever. So this is how a website would typically look before you apply CSS to it, and it basically, as I was saying at the start, looks like a Word document. Okay, it's just basically it's just a text file. It's just basic text. There's no color. There's, other than the links changing color, there's no color. There's nothing special about this website at all. It's just blank text and no styling whatsoever, and this is what you have before you can apply CSS to your website. Now, I then applied some CSS to this website, and again, this is absolutely terrible, but this is after I applied CSS to the website. So very basic CSS at that, okay, it's just got some color, it's got some borders, it's got some underline, it's got some broken up paragraphs, it's centered everything. There's a little bit of spacing between the links, but not much at all. It's very, very basic, but you can see that a little bit of CSS can change your website from looking like a generic sort of text document into being something with a little bit of color and a little bit more structure to it. Okay, so that's basically the idea of what we're going to cover today during this session, is how we can apply some very, very basic CSS to our websites in order to help us understand how we can apply a bit of styling to make them look a bit better, and not, like we said at the start, like a Word document. feel free to criticize, like I said, this website in the chat, because I know it looks horrible. I don't know what I was thinking with those choices of color. So feel free to criticize as much as you like in the chat about that website, because it is really awful. So just before we move on, one thing that I will just mention quickly is that we all started doing our project files last week. Oh, thanks, it's perfect. Thank you. So we all started doing some project files last week about, you know, how we want to structure our website, you know, what sort of layout, what sort of colors we want to do and things like that. So as we're working through today, you can add to that if you wish, in order to sort of remind yourselves on, you know, what new things you might have thought of, something new that you want to add, you might, you know, have thought of something you want to take away. So as we're working through today, you can update your project file if you want to, with anything that you want to add to your website or anything that you want to sort of take away from your website. So that being said, what we're going to do now that we've covered a little bit of an introduction is we're going to actually begin the process of linking our CSS document up to our HTML page. Now, if you are editing in CodePen, then you won't need to do this because it will do it for you automatically. But if you are editing locally, then you will need to include a couple of lines of code in your HTML file to make sure that your CSS file is linked to your HTML file. So I'm going to go through those with you now. If it's quite small on the screen, just let me know, and I'll see if I can. What I'll do, I'll fiddle around with it so that I can make it a bit bigger for you. So I'm just going to change the window that you can see on here, so the screen will go blank temporarily, and then you should be able to see. So this is an example of a bit more advanced HTML that I wrote as part of a... Does it? Yeah, I mean, it is. No, it's not too bad, I must admit. So this was for one of my assignments for university. I was writing a website for well, it was just a basic website. Can everybody read the line of text that I've highlighted, or is it a bit too small? Because I can make it bigger if it's a bit too small. Okay. So I did try figuring out if I could zoom in on VS Code earlier, and turns out it isn't possible. So what I will do is I will copy. Okay, so I'll read it out to you all anyway. So essentially what this line of code is doing here is it is saying that I'm linking a style sheet, okay, to i.e. a CSS sheet, to my HTML document. So that way you are able to actually tie the two together, so that way you're able to actually have your website looking pretty. So in order to do this, what you need to use is in the head part of your website, so within the head section between the two tags, what you need to do is you need to write out, so Andrew's put it in the chat as well just in case, you need to write out the word between angled brackets, so the two little arrows. You need to put link space, as Andrew's put, and then rel equals style sheet, so that's just saying that what you're linking is a style sheet. Then you need to say type equals text/CSS, so that the website knows that you're linking a CSS sheet. And then you'll see that there is a href, and what that's doing is that is linking this is where the link between your two pages comes together. Now I've got what's known as a file path here, okay, And what this file path is saying is that within my CSS folder there is a file called main.css, and that file, main.css, is what contains all of my CSS code. So what I mean by file path, I shall show you an example of what I mean by file path now. Stand by. There we go. So as you can see, what I've got here, I've got a documents folder, and within that, I know it says Google Chrome, but this is my HTML file. So this is what I've got open in VS Code, okay, all that code I had open before. So this activities page is my HTML code. Now, I haven't got any CSS file in here, but within the images file, you can see that I've got a whole bunch of images. And you can see, if you look at the path along the top of the screen here, that it follows a structure. So what I would say is that my CSS, if I wanted to reference an image so that I could have an image appear on the screen, what I would have is an image tag. I would have a href, which is equal to the name of my the name of my folder, which is .img, which would be img, slash the name of the image, and that would then pick up the image that's in that specific folder. Now, what you will need to try and do is make sure that when you're saving your CSS folder, that you save it within the same folder that you've saved your HTML. So that way, all you will need to put in your href is the name of your CSS file. So if you're creating separate folders to separate out your HTML and CSS and things, all you need to do is put the href as CSS slash the name of your file, or alternatively, if you just save them all in the same folder, say you just put them in my documents, all you need to put in the href is the name of your CSS file, and then they will all sort of link together. So for this specific example, if I just made a CSS document and put it within this folder, all I would need to put in my code here, just change the window, all I would need to put in here is main.css, because they're all within the same folder. So if everything's in the same folder, all you need to put in that href is the name of your folder, the name of your CSS file, and that's it. So that's a way of linking. I know it sounds quite convoluted, because some of you might not have come across file paths before, so if you need any help with that, then just let us know. There we are. Oh, sorry, Jace, I didn't see your question come up, but I think Andrew has answered that for you. Yeah, okay. So essentially, that is how you would link your CSS to your HTML. You just use a link tag. You say rel equals style sheet, type is equal to text slash CSS, and then the href, everything that goes between the quotes is just going to be either the file path or just the name of your file if everything is saved within the same folder. And that will then link everything together. And you can use that link tag as well if you're using things like a special font. So for an example, I use some Google fonts in my website, and so I linked to the Google Fonts page, and I also use some icons, not on this page I didn't, but on another one of the pages on the site I use some icons, and those icons I also link to them as well using the same link tag. So it's just a way of tying things all together in a way. You link them together by using that link tag. Okay, so that's pretty much the most confusing part of today. So if you've understood that, then fantastic. But if you do need any help, then just kind of let us know and we will do our best to help throughout the day. So, the next thing that we're going to do is, just a quick reminder as well. Remember, as you are writing out code today, same in CSS and HTML, remember to comment your code if you can, so that you can remind yourself about what each thing is doing. So when you're writing out a comment in HTML, you would use, well, I'll tell you what, I'll just show you instead of trying to explain it. So I will just switch over to Google Chrome, so the screen will have gone blank temporarily. Oops, wrong one. And that's still the wrong one. There we go. So let's open up last week's code. So when you're writing a comment, if we zoom in, I know I can zoom in on this one, we would use this weird kind of these weird sort of symbols to write a comment. And of course the purpose of the commenting is to remind you of what each bit of code is doing, and to explain to other people who are writing or who are reading your code what each part of your code is doing. And you can also write comments in CSS as well, but you can just use it's not double slash. Instead of using those weird sort of symbols, you can use a slash and a star, and then you would write something like, say, this is a comment, and then you would put a star and a slash, and that is then a comment within CSS. Okay, so I'm actually going to delete all of this CSS now, because we're going to start from fresh, so that we're all kind of in the same place. So I hope that's all made sense so far. I can see that Trace is having some success with different things that he's working on, so that's pretty good. Okay, so we'll take a few minutes now just to let everybody kind of have a chance to link up their style sheets and to make any comments that they want to make and things like that, just to have a bit of a chance for everybody to catch up. If anybody wants to ask any questions, then feel free to pop those in the chat, and we shall help you out as best we can. But we'll take a couple of minutes now just to let everybody have a chance to work on their websites and to ask any questions that they might have. I know I did a lot of talking, so just let me know if there's anything that you want me to go over again. Yeah, it's really coming together. It is much better than my terrible website that I had up on the screen earlier that I'd made. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, that's coming together really nicely, Chris. Well done. Yes. Looks like I think we're okay. Cool. Okay, so if everybody's happy, we'll crack on with introducing the purpose of CSS and how we would structure our website. Remember, if there is anything you want us to go over again, just pop it in the chat and we'll go through that again. So the reason that CSS was introduced was because it allows a much easier way to edit the appearance of your website, and it also allows us to have a much more it allows us to have much more freedom with what we do with our websites. So instead of having all of those inline styles that we had last week, so let's see if I can find one in here. So I've got an example of one here. So that changed, of course, the this paragraph or this sentence to green. Okay, instead of having that green just popped straight into the HTML, instead what we have got is what we can use instead is a style sheet, a CSS style sheet, which will keep all of our styles in one place, all of our editing in one place. It will have it'll give us much more freedom in terms of how we edit our website, and it's a much nicer structure. It's much easier to kind of work with than constant inline styles. Now, of course, it's important to remember, and I mentioned this briefly last week, we have this idea of specificity, which is, of course, it's essentially kind of like the how can I put it? It's kind of like a hierarchy in a way. So some things have more dominance than others when it comes to styling your websites. And essentially, inline styles have the highest specificity. And what this means is that when you put something as an inline style, if you were to try and override it using CSS, it wouldn't be possible, because the inline style takes precedence over anything that's styled in CSS. Okay? And that's essentially why it's important that if you do have any inline styles, you should remove them and put them all into so essentially direct all of your styling towards a CSS file, because it keeps a much otherwise you're not going to be able to edit it otherwise. So it is important that you bear that in mind as we're working our way through. Now, when you are structuring your CSS document, it works in a similar way to JavaScript. So we remember that JavaScript separates up functions and separates up bits of code and loops and things like that using curly brackets. And those curly brackets are used again in CSS, but you use a lot less of them in CSS than what you would do in JavaScript. But we use basic, essentially we just use 2 curly brackets per section in order to split up the contents of our CSS folder, so that we can kind of keep everything in one place. So you'll see as we go through why CSS is so much better than HTML, because than inline styles in HTML, because it's just so much easier and cleaner than what anything in inline styles is. Now, we are only going to be looking at the basics today. If we have time at the end, then what we'll do is we'll start going through the more advanced CSS stuff. Well, not advanced stuff, but a little bit more. We'll go into a bit more detail about different things that you can do, such as the hover facilities and things like that. But we're going to start off with the basics today, and then we'll work our way up as we go. So, first thing that we're going to do is we're just going to learn how to structure our folders. Now, I'm actually going to just remove all of my inline styles from my HTML document first. So everything that's considered to be an inline style, I'm going to remove. I will keep the I am going to keep the italics and things like that, because they're okay to stay in there for now. But anything else that's considered to be an inline style should be removed. I think I've had everything. So the way that you structure a CSS document is essentially you name a section, you open up a curly bracket, and then you start saying what you want to do with it. So we'll give an example. So let's say we want to make our heading an underlined heading. Okay. So in order to do that, what we would do is we would say H1, because that is the, that's the tag that's issued to the heading. We would then open up a curly bracket, press enter, and then essentially you'll see then that we are again using this idea of indentation. So we are going back to this idea of having, in a way, not necessarily nested code, but indented code, which makes sure that that we can clearly see how each section or what's part of each section. And let's just say we want to say that this is underlined. There is a whole bunch of websites out there that outline to you a whole series of different things that you can do in CSS. So I'm only going to go through a couple with you now. But let's say we want this as underline. Well, to do that, we could say text decoration. We then use a colon, and then we would say underline, and a semicolon would come at the end of it. And you can see that now my heading has now shifted to becoming an underlined heading. Okay. Now, of course, there's a whole different bunch of different things that we can do, but this gives us a basic idea of the structure of every element that we can edit within our CSS file. So let's give another example. So let's just say we want to center our heading. So we would say text align, and then we would say center. And you can see now that my heading has shifted to being in the center of the screen. So everything that's part of a certain section, okay, is indented. As you can see, there's some indentation, and it's all housed between two curly brackets that come after the name of the elements that you want to edit. Okay, so that is some examples of some things we can do with the heading. So let's give a few more. So we've got our text decoration, it's underlined. We've got our text aligned to being center. Let's say we want to alter the font size. So we would say font size, and then I'm going to say, let's say for an example, 35 pt, and you can see that that's made it much, much bigger. Now, obviously, headings themselves do shrink down in sizes as you work through them. So a H1 is biggest, then a H2, then a H3, etc., etc. And you can see that I've used the PT unit, which is obviously probably a lot of you will be familiar with that in things like Word, PowerPoint, Publisher, emails. Okay, font sizes are measured using PT, which stands for point. Okay, so when you are adjusting font sizes, you can use PT or point, and that will then adjust your font size. So you can see now that it's made my heading much, much bigger because I've used PT, 35 PT. What else could we do? So for now, let's give this let's give a background color. Okay. To my heading. Now remember, color is spelt in the American way using COLOR, and let's say I'm going to make it, we'll say red for now. Now obviously you can, yeah. How do you connect the two together? Okay, yeah, so if Andrew would be able to just link, if Andrew could just copy and paste the code again into the Discord for you. So Andrew's just put that in there for you. So you can see that there's we use something known as a link tag. Okay, so you could copy that identically into the into your HTML file. So it goes in the head section. Okay, so in between the two head tags, you can copy and paste that code, and then where it says href equals, what you need to put in there is the name of your CSS file. Okay. So if you copy and paste that code and then change the href equals, whatever the name of your CSS file is, what will go between those two sets of quotes. So Andrew's put that in the chat for you. Okay. And then that's it. That's all you have to do. So just make sure it goes in the head section as well, okay? So it's so when you're loading the website, it's not showing any of the HTML either. Any of the CSS. What have you included stuff in the CSS as well? Yeah. What have you put in so far? Okay. Okay. Let's have a look. Let's have a look. So your so you put CSS. Oh, you have, and you got, and the file path is have you set, you know, your CSS, is it saved inside of a folder called CSS as well? That's okay. You got it? Yeah? Cool. There you go. Yeah, so there we are. That's good. Well done. Good bit of troubleshooting. So that's an so okay. So as you can see, just to get back to where we were with the CSS, you can see that the background has filled the entire. It's gone beyond the length of the heading. Okay, and that's because every element. Okay, and what I mean by that is, so every time you add something, so for an example, when you add a H1, when you add a nav, when you add a paragraph, everything can be thought of as its own kind of box, and they take up the full width of the screen. So they're all stacked one on top of each other. So imagine like a stack of boxes. So your first box in this case might be your H1, okay, and then under that, then your second box then would be your nav, etc., etc., and they take up the full width of your screen, 100% the width of your screen. Okay, so later on, when we start looking at margins, borders, and padding, you'll be able to reduce that so that it doesn't take up the full width of the screen. Okay, but we'll look at that a bit later on. So that is a little bit of stuff about fonts. Now, about font styling, I should say. What I would like to add to my CSS file as well, and I'm going to put it above the H1 because it's a good idea to try and keep things in the same order. You don't have to do this, but if you can try and keep the elements within your CSS file in the same order as what they are within the HTML file. So instead, so like for an example now, I'm going to start with HTML, because that's the first thing. Then my H1 is my second thing, and then I would probably start working on the nav, for an example. So try and keep the order of the elements in the HTML and the CSS consistent between the two. So within the HTML file, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to specify a change in font. Now, by putting it after HTML in the CSS file, this means it's going to apply to the whole website. Okay, so the entire website is going to be completely just all changed by whatever I put between these curly brackets. So what I'm going to include is a change in font family to start off with. So font family is essentially the same thing as a font style, okay? And I'm going to list 3 different fonts. So I'm going to say Arial, I'm going to use, we'll say Helvetica for an example, and then I'm also going to end then with sans serif. Does anybody know the reason why I've listed 3 separate fonts? No? You can see that First is typing, so maybe First knows. To make sure at least the last one is picked. Yeah, absolutely. So essentially, sometimes different, as I mentioned, I think I mentioned last week or the week before, different browsers will often interpret things differently, and therefore sometimes you will find that not every single browser has or is able to understand or is compatible with the font that you've chosen. So if you list a series of fonts, what happens, as Jace has put in the chat there, they go through one by one checking if it has it. So I've started with Arial. So when I've opened up Google Chrome and I've got my, obviously you can see here I've got my website, the first thing it's done is it's gone, right, the CSS says that the font family needs to be Arial. So it will check its library to see if it has Arial in its library. If it doesn't, then it will go, okay, I will then go to check if I have Helvetica, etc, etc. Now every single website will always have sans serif, which is the last font here. So sans serif is pretty much kind of like your default HTML text font style. Okay, so every single website has sans serif. It's always it's always there, which is why normally it always comes at the end of your font family list, because it'll never be your first choice of font, because it's the default font. So by listing all of the fonts that you want, your browser will check to see if it has any of those fonts available, and it will choose in order of precedence which one it goes for first, and it will go through the list. So that's why I've listed 3 different fonts there. You could list even more fonts if you wanted to. You know, if you've got maybe a set of slightly unique fonts, you might want to list all of the fonts that you want, and it could be that by chance the browser does have a compatible font. Okay, so well done, Chris, for getting that one right. So by putting this between the curly braces after HTML, what you can see now is that my entire, if I make it a bit bigger, my entire website has now changed to containing, well, what I assume is Arial font. Okay. Because it has checked and it has gone, yes, Arial font is available within my library, so therefore your website can be written in Arial font. Okay, so that is an example of something that you can do. And you can also, I'm going to put, like in my other website, I'm going to put a really terrible background colour. So let's make it, what colour shall we say? Let's go for orange. So I've got a really terrible orange background, but you can see that by putting it between those HTML curly braces, it has applied it to the entire website. So the whole website is now full because it's applied this styling to the entire HTML document, so everything between the 2 HTML tags. Now, the next question that I have is, can anybody tell me how we can be more specific with the colours that we choose? So instead of just writing orange or red, can anybody tell me what we can, does anybody know how we can have more specific color choice instead of just naming colors? Yeah. Yeah, you got it spot on. So RGB is one example. There's also RGBA, and RGBA is that adds. It's where you add a little bit of opacity, so makes things a little bit kind of look like they're see-through. And then yeah, that's it. And then you've also got something known as hex codes as well, and hex codes work in the same way as an RGB code. So on Google, if you were to type in something like RGB code or RGB code wheel or something like that, there are a whole bunch of different ones. So W3C Schools has got one. And also Google also has a built-in one somewhere. Let's see if we can find it. There you go. There you go. So that's it. So you can see so you can see there that if you do search for RGB, well, I've got RGB color picker, which obviously isn't right, but RGB color picker on Google, what it does is it will let you select a specific color using the slider. So let's go with, say, blue, and then you can use the sort of little dropper in the corner to determine a specific color point. So if we went for, say, this kind of lilac color, and then it will tell you the hex code, which always starts, if I can zoom in a bit for you to see, there you go. So it always starts with a hash symbol or a pound symbol followed by a bunch of letters and numbers. And then there's also an RGB code, okay, and then there's all these other codes that you can use as well. But the best ones to use when you're using when you're doing a bit of web design is to stick with hex codes, or you could use RGB. So Fierce has got favorite color. So let's go with Fierce's favorite color for our background style. So we're going to use background color. So what have we got? So it's going to be pound symbol 4F92FFF. Oh, whoops. There we go. So that is a really nice colour as well, actually. It's obviously clashing with my horrible red title that I've got here, but that's a really nice colour blue. So that's an example of how we can apply a background colour using a hex code. But let's say we want to change our font colour for our heading. We'll use an RGB code for this. So we'll say colour, and then let's choose a colour from here. So I've obviously gone for this sort of lilac colour, and it's 156.142.209. So if I copy that, I would say RGB, open bracket, then I can paste that in there, and you can see now that it has got really horrible contrast, but it has indeed changed the colour of my heading to being in that lilac kind of colour. It's so bad. I'm just going to remove the background colour altogether because it's terrible. There we go. So exactly. So that is so I've got another hex. So we'll change the background color back to Trace's suggestion. Oh, and I've forgotten to put a semicolon there as well. So Trace's suggestion is BA 7A 30. Oh, so it is kind of like a brown sort of colour. So lots of so as you can see, basically using this colour picker, you can choose any colour that you want, and it will give you the hex code, and it will also give you the RGB code. And you can also, as I said, use RGBA if you want to as well, to add a bit of transparency to your colours. So let's, for an example, let's do that with a background colour. So let's just quickly, actually no, let's do it with the background colour. So let's just quickly change the brown just quickly to being in an RGB code. So let's choose a different colour on here that looks similar to Trace's. So not quite the same as Trace's, but there we go. Let's go with that. So let's copy and paste this colour into here. And I've actually spelt it correctly as well. RGB. But if you put RGB, if you put RGBA, and then I believe if you put something like comma 1, let's have a look, see if we can compare. So that's it without, and let's see if it looks any different with. It's probably quite hard to tell with that specific colour actually what the difference is. Let's make it something like 0.3 instead. There you go. So you can see there's a bit more of a difference now. It's become much more transparent. I said 0.5. It's a bit less transparent. 0.9. Slightly less. So you can add a little bit of transparency to your websites by doing it like that. So what we're going to do now is we're just going to spend a little bit of time adding a bit of CSS to our websites. Okay. We're also going to spend a little bit of time maybe adding a bit of content to our websites as well. And then if anybody has got any questions that they want to ask, then feel free to do so. I'm sure all of your websites are already looking a lot better than my horrible sort of... the only nice thing about my website currently is Trace's background colour. The rest of it is not good. So I'm going to start having a bit of a play around with my website and adding a bit more content to the website. If anybody does have any questions, then let me know. Andrew and I can try and help you with that. But other than that, we'll spend a little bit of time now going through our websites and adding a bit of content, playing around with the CSS, and then we'll have a look at some other features that we can make use of when it comes to editing with CSS in a little while. Has anybody got any questions so far? Yep. Well, it's certainly coming together really nicely. That's a really good. That is a really good start. Absolutely. Oh well, I mean, honestly, it's got to be yours. Mine, mine's horrible. So no, that's looking really good. Well done. So, like I said, what we'll do now then, we'll spend a bit of time looking at our websites, kind of tinkering with them a bit, making them look a bit better. and then we'll come back in a little while, and what we'll do then is we will look at a few more other things that we can do with CSS. There we are. That's good. I am. Yeah, sorry. I am still here. No, I'm still here. I'm still here. So we'll get started on that I'll get started. So we're just going to be spending some time now editing our website. So just carry on with what you were doing a second ago, just adding some bits and pieces to your websites. We'll carry on then in a little while. I'll be on here in case you have any questions, and so will Andrew. If I'm quiet, it's because I'm concentrating very hard on trying to how I can try and make this website look a lot less like it currently does. Okay. What's a people's opinion on the colour green in a website? Too bright? Andrew was not a huge fan of my website that I showed you all earlier. I was very disappointed. Oh, look at that. Green is my favourite colour. I think that's looking pretty good to me. Maybe a slightly darker green would be better, so it's a bit more subtle. 23, 122, 7. There you go, look at that. I do like this blue background for this. It is a really nice colour. So remember, if you do want to add a few things to more than just your HTML and your H1, you can do. You can apply it to more than just these elements. So if you wanted to change your H2, for an example, you just have to write H2, open bracket, close bracket, or curly brackets, and then you can edit that as well. You can go further than just your HTML and H1. And remember, if you like as well, you can also update your project files, just in case you might have some ideas or something like that you want to add, and you've thought about now. So in case you forget them later, you can always add them straight to the to your project files now if you want to, so that you don't forget. And also remember to keep saving your work as well, just in case something crashes. Oh, right. Well, on CodePen, if you don't save your work after so long, it flashes up with like a massive yellow text box saying you've made too many changes and not made any saves, which is quite handy in some ways. Okay. What was that, sorry? Yeah. Okay. Comic Sans. Comic Sans is a pretty cool font. Yeah. I'm not sure. Trace is not a fan of Comic Sans. Into Comic Sans. Okay, what else can I do on this to try and make it look a bit better? Let's have a look. Okay, I think I'm going to get rid of a couple of... I'm going to get rid of the unordered list. Sorry, the ordered list, because I don't need that. There we go. There you go. So remember, while we're all tinkering on our websites, remember that if you want to add to your HTML as well, you can. You know, if you want to add a couple of lists, new headings, new sections, things like that, you can. And if you do need any help with that, then just let me know. If you need to remind yourselves on how to do it. Andrews is coming along really nicely. Is everybody else getting on okay so far? That's okay. Yeah, we'll carry on in about 5 minutes or so. We'll carry on. Just want to make sure that everybody's had enough time to add some things to their websites before we carry on, and then we'll carry on in a second. Spend another about 5 minutes or so just tinkering, and then we'll carry on. Okay. can we do with this part? So feel free as well to do some research and things like that to add to your website. So I can see that Trace's website is looking fantastic. Are you? I can see Trace. You got VS Code open. Are you editing in VS Code? Okay, that's cool. That's what I was using. I was using VS Code as well. It was quite. It's quite nice VS Code, isn't it? Because it kind of auto suggests things as well, doesn't it? When you're writing out, it kind of try and help you auto complete tags and things like that. And it'll help you properly structure the document. It's quite nice to use. I used it a lot last year. So down in the footer, so you can see on the footer that's on my website, I've actually currently got some links. So like we saw, if we have a look on the Visit Wales website like we did before, oh wow, we're really zoomed in. There we go. So the Visit Wales website, down in the footer, you can see that they've got quite a lot of different links to different places, as well as Ray said earlier, a lot of the boring stuff. But there is a lot of some like quite good links, the sitemap, and there's links to the social media sites that Visit Wales have and things like that. So all of this is this is all stuff to do with this is all stuff that can be used or placed in a footer, and they've even got the Welsh Dragon down in their footer as well, in order to help them, in order to kind of not necessarily hide away a lot of the boring stuff, but to keep it kind of neat all in one place, for people to use when they if they need it. Yeah, so that's that. So we'll start in just a second, then we'll move on to looking at some other parts of CSS that can be quite useful, and some different things that we can do with that. Before we do that, does anybody have any questions that they want to ask about what we've covered so far, or is everybody quite happy with where we're up to? Good, okay. So I think everybody's fairly happy with how we're of where we're up to so far. So we're going to start taking a look now then at something else. I'm just going to oh no, it should be fine actually. I'm just going to change the window for you to go. We're going to go back to that PowerPoint from earlier. So I'm just going to change, and if I can find the right one. Every time I get it wrong, there we go. So hopefully you can all see the PowerPoint again now, because what we're going to do is we're going to talk about a specific part of CSS that's quite useful when we are restructuring our web page, when we're applying. This is more kind of in the context of positioning things on the web page and how big things are. So what we're going to be looking at is something called margins, borders, and padding. Now these three things are really, really crucial to web design, okay? Because these are the kind of the basics that help us build up the website. So I've got a screenshot on the screen here of what I mean by margins, borders, and padding. And every single element that we put into our HTML document, as we know, all contains it's all kind of, you can picture it as I said like a box. Okay, so everything that you put into your HTML document is like a box. Okay, so there's everything is stacked one thing on top of the other, and it's all and it's all kind of, you know, laid out in a clear-cut structure, and everything takes up 100% the width of the page. Now every element, so for example a H1, every paragraph, every H2, every image, okay, they all are surrounded by margins, borders, and padding. Now you don't always necessarily see them, okay, they're not always visible, but they're there. And this is why when you look at your websites, you will find that there are things like gaps between, say, your nav bar and maybe the heading that's above it, or perhaps separate paragraphs have all got big sort of gaps between them. The reason for that is because the space in between is taken up by margins, borders, and padding. So the center of this diagram, okay, so the center of this diagram, this is the content. So this is, say for an example, let's say that this is a H1, okay, so the content will be everything that the H1 is made up of. So say the heading might say welcome, so let's say this is our welcome H1 that goes at the top of our page. That H1 will have padding around it, which is the section highlighted in yellow. It will have then a border that goes around the padding, and then it will have a margin that goes right the way around the outside of all of that. And we can adjust the sizes, the thickness of each one of these in order to help us structure our website to have a little bit more structure to it, and to reorganize where things go on the website. Because of course you can't just drag and drop content around, you can't move it around, you know, by clicking and dragging it into being in a different place. You have to physically reprogram it using CSS in order to do that. And this is where the idea of margins, borders, and padding comes into effect. So what we're going to have a look at now is how we can use margins, borders, and padding, and how we can restructure margins, borders, and padding within our websites in order to reposition where things appear on our page. Before we do that, however, I would like to point out that there is a really useful feature that comes a part of Google Chrome, which you can use, and I mentioned about it last week, which will help you view how much of a margin, how much of a border, and how much padding there is around each one of your elements. And that is done using what's known as the element inspector. So if we head back to Google Chrome, if I click on the wrong one once, I'm going to do it 1,000 times. So I've got my website here, okay, and if I right click in the preview area and go to inspect, what you'll see is that we're launched into the element inspector, which is this big kind of menu screen that's appeared on the right. Now what you will note is that running down the side of, so a lot of this is a lot of the stuff that comes at the top, this is all CodePen's website code, okay. Whereas further down here, when we get to doc type HTML, this is actually my website here, okay. So this bit of this section of the HTML is my website. If I can zoom in a bit for you to take a look at that. Okay, so this is all my website, okay, and you can see that what's on the right hand side of the screen here, just kind of drag that out a bit, there we go, is all of my CSS. And you will see that what I have here is the margins, borders and padding of the element that's highlighted. So let's highlight my H1. Okay, now we can see all of the CSS that I've included in the website so far appears on the right hand side of the screen here, and you can see that it matches exactly what I've got in my CSS on the website. I've aligned the text to being center, I've given it a font size of 35 points, and I've given it the color RGB 23, 122 and 7. And you can see that all of this is actually displayed in the element inspector. Now what's really useful about the element inspector, for those of you who aren't familiar with it, is that it allows you to actually edit the website in real time without making any permanent change. So let's say I decide I want to take a look at how my heading looks without any color applied to it. If I untick the color section, you can see now that my font has gone back to being black. If I retick it, you can see it's gone back to being green. Let's just say I want to have a look at how my website looks when the heading is only 25 points. Okay, you can see that I can adjust all of this stuff in real time without it actually making a permanent change to the website. So it gives you an opportunity to see how things would look. Now the other thing that it does is it also lets me view the margins, borders and padding that surrounds each one of the elements. And the reason that this is useful is because that when you are editing your HTML and your CSS, you can make changes without completely messing up the layout of your website. You can write it down. Once you're happy with the change that you've made and you know what change you need to make, all you need to do then is simply change the HTML or the CSS within your actual within your actual HTML or CSS document, and then the change is permanent. But it means that you don't have to deal with accidentally making a change, not being able to undo it, and then you having to start all over again in order to make it look sort of take it back to normal. So if we're taking a look here now at my H1, you can see that when I hover over the content, which is the middle part of this diagram, you can see that on the left of the screen it actually highlights the element in blue. So you can see that that box takes up that much space on my website. If I then go out to padding, you can see that it currently doesn't have any padding and it currently doesn't have any border, but you can see that its margin is highlighted using the orange, those big orange lines that appear above and below it. And you can see that that is why on my website currently, when I go to when I am looking at my heading, there's a big gap that runs along the top of the screen here and between the bottom of the heading and also the nav bar, and we're able to adjust that within our HTML within our elements inspector to prevent us from having to make the change permanent on the website. But in order so that you can actually see it all clearly, I'm going to just edit it live on the website anyway. So I've mentioned yes, so you can use Control-Z, but sometimes it's better to kind of test how it comes across on the element inspector first, because often if you make too many big changes, sometimes it can be difficult to revert it back to how it once was. So it's but yeah, you could potentially use Control-Z, definitely. So if we just give it a quick example of one way that you can apply that that change to the margins, borders and padding, let's just say we want to reduce that margins, borders and padding for the heading. If we say margin 0 pixels, you can see that it has now completely reduced the margin to being non-existent. And you can see that we're using, and we'll look at more different units that we could use within the context of web design next week. However, I'm using pixels as the unit of measurement, and pixels are what we use quite often when it comes to web design in terms of as a specific unit of measurement. And you can apply that as well to lots and lots of different things as well, you know, not just margins, borders and padding. If you wanted to adjust the width of something, you could use pixels. If you wanted to adjust the height of something, you could use pixels. It's used, you know, quite a lot, but we can focus on that again next week. So you can see here now that I have reduced the margin around my H1 to being 0 pixels. And if I launch the element inspector to show that, you can see that now when I hover over the H1, there is no longer a margin because I've removed it. Okay. So margins, borders and padding are different ways in which you can restructure the website. You can obviously separate things more by adding padding, or adding margins. Okay. There's a whole bunch of things that you can do. What we're going to do now is I'll demonstrate how we can adjust our navbar to kind of having a little bit more of a structure to it, so that it doesn't just look like a bullet pointed list. Okay, because currently it just looks like a list, and you know, kind of looks a little bit boring. So in order to show you how we can really apply margins, borders and padding, we will have a look at a way in which we can restructure our navbar. Before we do that though, does anybody have any questions about that so far? How do you create a navbar? Okay, yeah, so we go through that. So to create a navbar, you'll need to put it into your HTML. And what you would need to do, you could probably see it on my screen now, is there's a within the header of your document, okay, so it will go at the top of the screen, you can include a list, and that list is going to contain well, at the moment mine doesn't contain any links to anywhere, so you can just put in a blank href, but essentially I've got a navbar that goes along the top of the screen using the nav tags, which essentially will link, which will essentially be just a list of links eventually. Currently, obviously, they haven't got any links associated with them, but you'll need a code, something that looks similar to that. I'll leave that on my screen for you for a second. Andrew's put it in the chat as well. I will leave that on the screen for a second just so that you can copy that over. So as we know, a purpose of a navbar is it's kind of like a menu that helps you to navigate through different parts of the website without having to worry about, you know, having to press backspace to go back to another page or anything like that. You can simply just click on along the top of the screen, choose one of the options, and then it will navigate you to that specific part of the website, because it's consistent across every page, which is actually a good thing, something to mention as well. It's quite important that you keep the header of each one of your pages consistent. So if you're designing multiple pages for a single website, it's important to try and keep the header consistent throughout the entire website, because you obviously want to have a good level of consistency throughout all of your pages, and that's the best way to do that. Okay. So if we just use that Visit Wales website as an example, you can see that on the front page, home page, there's the nav bar that goes along the top of the screen. If I click on Places to Stay, we can see that the nav bar is in exactly the same place. It's not moved. Everything is in the same place. If we go to Things to Do, it's not moved. It's in exactly the same place. Okay, so it's important to have that consistency throughout each one of your websites. Okay, so on that basis, what we're going to do now is we're going to look at a way in which we can adjust the way that our nav bar looks so that we're able to make it look a bit more like a nav bar and not just a list with bullet points. Okay, so back on my CSS, I'm going to put my nav bar after my H1 because that is of course where I have that is the order in which it comes in my HTML, and the tag that I'm going to use to start off with is nav UL, and the reason that I'm saying nav UL is because I'm referring specifically to the list that comes within the nav. Okay, so we've got nav followed by the word UL. It's two tags together, but it is, yeah. Mm. Oh, on your website. Yeah, I'll have a look. Oh, I see. Okay. And you know, in your HTML, have you put the is the nav definitely below your H1? If you like, you can send you can copy and paste your. Have you got it? Yeah. There you go. Good. Well done. So we're going to start with editing the nav UL, which is the list that comes within the nav. So you can put more than one tag in your CSS file. If you need to refer to a specific part of your document, you can put more than one tag after the other. So I'm going to say nav UL, and what we're going to do is I'm going to center my list so that it goes kind of, so we're going to make it essentially look like how Chris has done his. Chris's of course will be a lot better than mine, and it's also going to look quite similar to how Visit Wales have done it as well, where they have different links in kind of like an order. They're in line, okay, kind of in one long line. So what we're going to do to begin with is we're going to say text align, and we're going to say center. And what that's going to do now, you can see, is it has done text align center, and it has centered them in the middle of the page, but it has left these bullet points going down the side of the screen. So we can get rid of those in a second. We'll leave them there. We'll leave them there for now, but we can get rid of those in a second. But what we need to do, of course, is actually make this look like an actual menu. So we shall adjust that in a second. So just go back to that. There we go. So what we're going to do to start with is we're going to actually have these displayed in a line, like Chris has done and like on the Visit Wales website. So to do that, we're going to actually not refer specifically to the UL, but we're going to refer to each one of the list items. So that's going to be a nav li. Okay, so we're referring here now to specifically the list items. Okay, so all of the list items. And we're going to change these to being displayed in line, and to do that we just simply say display in line. And now you can see that all of the bullet points have actually disappeared now because they're displayed in line rather than as a list. But you can remove the bullet points as well using a separate bit of code, where you can actually say you can say a list style type none. So let's see if this works. So if I just temporarily remove that and I say list style type none, you can see that that also removes the bullet points as well. And you can change you can change your list style type from being bullet points to being different icons as well if you wanted to. But we obviously, in this case, we don't want to have them in the list at all. So we're going to remove list style type none, and we're just going to put it back as display in line. Whoops. There we go. Okay, so now everything is displayed in line. You can see that now what we have is a list starting to come a bit more together. Okay. Now, we obviously want to separate these apart from each other because currently they're really joined together. You can see that they're kind of squashed together. There's no spacing between them. You know, Fierce has got nice spacing on his. Visit Wales have got big gaps between each one so that they're clearly in separate places. So what we're going to do is we're going to apply a little bit of padding. So I mentioned padding earlier. We're going to apply some padding to our links. So it's going to be, I'm going to say 5 pixels will separate each one of my links out quite nicely. So if I just remove that so you can see the difference. So there's it before padding, and there it is after padding. So you can see now that there's a bit more of a gap between them. In fact, let's make it a bit bigger, let's say 15 pixels. So you can see now that there's much more of a gap between each one. Still centered down the page, but there's much more of a gap between each one. Okay. Actually, what I'll do for you is I'll put that list style type back on the screen just in case any of you want to use it. There we go. There we go. So we've now applied a little bit of padding. We've applied a little bit of space between each one, but they still look like horrible links, don't they? You know, they turn purple when you click them, which is good, but so that you know you visited them before, but they're looking a little bit boring because they're just generic purple links. So we can make them look a little bit more like, well, we can make them look a little bit more fancy. And the way to do that is we can say something like, let's apply a border around them to start. Well, in fact, let's get rid of the underlining first, because that kind of looks a bit like it's a link, and we don't want them to look like a link. We want them to look like a bit more like buttons. So we can say text decoration, and then we can say none, and that will get rid of hopefully the. Okay, it hasn't quite got rid of the underline because it's there's something else that we need to do that, thinking about it, but it's best to just keep it as text decoration none for now anyway. And then perhaps one thing that we might to do is apply a border to each one of the list items so that they kind of look a bit more like buttons. So we could say border style, which is solid. Okay. And you can see now that it's starting to come together a little bit. Obviously each one currently is a different size, but we can always adjust that later on. And we can also, for an example, we can then set the background color of each one, or let's say we'll change the border color of each one to start off with. So let's just say red for now. There we go. So we're starting to see a bit more kind of structure. Again, this is very basic, sort of quite, you know, not very nicely styled by me. So feel free to kind of do, you know, Andrew's got a really nice website going. Well, everybody's got a really nice website going so far. Bar for me. I don't know. I think all faith has really been lost with my website. To be honest, it's not looking good. So we have got now our border surrounding each one of our list items, so it looks a little bit more like a button. And then we can also adjust the width of the border as well, maybe 5 pixels. Kind of makes them look a little bit bolder. Okay, so you can see that we're starting to kind of add subtle changes, which are kind of, okay, you know, this obviously looks nothing like the Visit Wales website, but subtle changes which are starting to make it look a little bit more like you would expect of a normal website, where there's a bit of structure, there's a bit more clarity to the layout of it and things like that. And it's a bit more, well, I wouldn't call my website stylish, but it's starting to look a bit more stylish than what it did when it just was plain text. What else can we do? Let's have a think. Is there anything else that we can change? We could adjust the anchors. So the anchors are, of course, as we can see on this here, this is where we would put a link to a different part of the website. Currently mine are populated with pound symbols so that they can go nowhere, because we don't need them to currently go anywhere. But if I was to say A for anchor, and then say text decoration none, you can see that that's now removed the underline on all. Yeah, so they are hashtags, hash symbols. They're also called, you can also refer to them as pound symbols. They've got a whole bunch of names, but hashtag is fine by me. I like hashtags, so we'll go with hashtag. So at the moment they've got hashtags in between them, because what that's basically saying is that they're not going anywhere. They're just going to nowhere. They're just blank links that aren't going anywhere. So that's the purpose of them. And then text decoration none is removing that underline now, so when we click them they are turning currently red because we haven't applied any hover styles yet, but that's essentially how we're looking so far with that. So on that basis, I'm going to leave this up on the screen as some examples of some things that have been done and that you can do to kind of apply a few bits of changes. For the last quarter of an hour of this session, what I'd like everybody to do is work on their websites, add a few more things, make them look a lot better than mine, which isn't very hard, and then ask as many questions as you like then to try and so that we can help you apply more styles to your website. So I know I've done a lot of talking today, we've learned quite a few things, but has anybody got any questions that they'd like to ask so far? Okay. Yeah? Oh, so what do you want to include? An image in your website? Oh, okay, yeah. So you want to center that in the middle of your website. Okay, so you can center the image. So you should. This should work. Oh, I see. Yeah, you can just use IMG. That should work. Yeah, that should work. One thing that we'll be looking at next week is how to apply different classes to things. So I did touch upon these before, and there is one here in my on my screen now for my menu. Essentially, the idea behind a class is that it lets you have a little bit more control over which elements you want to edit in the website. So if I give an example now quickly for you, currently what we can see is that my nav has been edited at the top of the screen here, and it's got red borders around it, it's got, you know, all of that. If I scroll down to the bottom of the website, you can see that the nav that I have in the footer has also been edited to have all of the same features as the nav that's at the top of the website. And that's because what the CSS is currently doing is it's going, oh, you want to edit all of the nav ULs and all of the nav LIs and all of the anchors within the website to look exactly the same. But in reality, as we can see, for an example, on the Visit Wales website, the nav LIs that's run along the top of the screen look quite different to the nav LIs that are at the bottom of the screen. So as a result, we can separate our website up into different classes so that we're able to actually sort of adjust individual menus as opposed to all of them at the same time. Okay. Ah, yes. Yes. I can see where you're going. So it is a good point that Andrew has made. So as I mentioned earlier, the I have listed multiple different what I've done here, for example, is I've said nav UL. So I've listed there two different elements of the website in which it is edited, and it has changed that specific it's changed all of the nav ULs that are within the website. But let's just say I was to put footer nav UL before that. You can see now, well, only the footer is yes, only the footer has been affected. So the nav UL that's at the top of the screen has stayed left aligned because this is saying text align center is only applying to the footer. So that is one way that you can get around it. So censoring an image is a good question. Let me have a think. There is a way of doing it. Yeah. 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 So these are a few bits and pieces that we could actually cover next week when we start looking at a little bit more CSS and a little bit more bits and pieces. we can start looking at adjusting heights, widths, how we can reposition things on the website to looking a little bit more. So instead of having stuff constantly stacked one thing on top of the other, we can start shifting things around on the website so that things can be on the left, things can be on the right, etc., etc. Okay. Does anyone else have any more questions in the meantime? It's okay. If you don't worry. Mm. I don't know about that. Yeah, they are very good. W3 schools have got a lot of content, which is really really good. And there's another website as well, actually, which I will grab the link for now, which was recommended by one of my lecturers. Let me just have a think. Find them. That's good. So I've sent over a link as well to the MDN, because they are very good with a whole bunch of different, like, anything to do with web design. Pretty much MDN are quite good with it. If you wanted to learn more about them, about sort of web design and about HTML style sheets, that sort of thing, MDN have got a lot of really useful information that talks about how to do different things. So I would recommend that you take a look at MDN as well. W3 schools is definitely a good place to start, though, because they're quite a good place to start because they kind of break things down a bit more. But if you wanted to know a little bit more advanced stuff, MDN is very good for that sort of thing. So I'd recommend that you look at those as well. Right. Okay. that sounds good. Cool. Okay. Um, so before we wrap up today, then, does anybody have any other questions that they want to ask before we finish? No. You good? That's good. Okay. That's fine. So as Andrew was saying, as one thing to kind of remind you of all as well, if you have been working on your project files today, then try your best to or make sure that you update those with anything that you've added today or anything that you want to add in future, so that you, in case you have remembered the thought about something now that you remember about, just sort of in a couple of weeks that you might think, oh, I wanted to add that, you can add it to your project files. And then, as I said, what we'll be looking at next week is a little bit more on CSS, about how we can sort of reposition things a bit more on our website, how we can make use of that element inspector a little bit more. And then eventually as well, we'll start looking as well at mobile first design, which, as Andrew said, is really important when it comes to designing your website, because most people nowadays do use their phones to visit websites and not in the first instance at least, and not so much a browser on a PC. So with that in mind, we'll probably wrap things up there then, because we're coming up to 6 o'clock now. We've covered everything that we wanted to cover today, which is good. So I do really hope that you have all enjoyed taking part today, and that you've learned some new things, or have had the chance to carry on building up your websites with Andrew and I around. Like we said before, if you do have any questions that you need to kind of put in the if you do have any questions that you think of during the week, pop them in the Discord, and we'll do our best to answer them either during the week or during next week's live stream. But other than that, I think we'll leave everything there. So I'll stop the streams off now, and thank you everybody for thank you everybody for joining in. No problem. That's okay. Bye.